It's not often on the Spark podcast that I get to sit down with somebody who I've known most of their life. And so I'm very excited today to be joined by Benji Rosenzweig, who is my cousin's cousin. And that's not just, saying that like we like each other and we're friends, but literally we share a first cousin with each other. And I think I grew up most of my life not knowing that Benji wasn't actually my cousin, and all of Benji's siblings because our families were always very, very close to one another. But I thought it would be good to talk to Benji because his life has really been phenomenal. And the things that he's done, especially in the latter parts of our lives, now that we're in that 40 range. For you, it's still a range, I think. But now that we're there, the things that you're doing now are just truly incredible. And I wanted to be able to spend some time and have you share with our audience some of the incredible things that have been part of your life. So, welcome, Benji Rosenzweig, via Zoom from Detroit.
Thank you so much for having me. And just to tell people that these are not platitudes, I refer to your dad as Uncle Avi. Yeah, I was also shocked when I found out that we aren't actually cousins, but we really grew up together like that. So
And it's funny because we were joking around with each other not that long ago after our uncle passed away, and we were joking that I always called him Uncle Bill and you always called him Uncle Willie, and it was just same person, but we had this different name for him, and uh,
yeah,
family is family, and that's a great thing. But I
I'm
want to talk a little bit about you and one of my first memories of you is when your family came from Israel to Cleveland. You moved from Israel to Cleveland, and you were living in Aunt Phyllis and Uncle Bill's house. Those were my first Benji memories, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what that transition was like at a young age to leave your home and move to a new home, and to where that's taken you since.
yeah. You know, I I was young. I was 5, 6 years old when we moved to America. We moved into Uncle Bill and Aunt Phyllis's house, or Uncle Willie's house, and I what I remember and what people tell me from that time are fairly consistent in that I wanted to be in Israel. I wanted to stay in Israel. I didn't want to be didn't want to be in America. Our Aunt Phyllis was an English second language teacher, and my mother was an English teacher for kids who spoke other languages in Israel, right? So she was an English teacher in Israel. So both of them were very much under the direction of stop speaking Hebrew, start speaking English so that you can learn English better. And because of that, and the fact that I was now in an American school where they were speaking Hebrew with an American accent, my Hebrew changed and got altered. And then, we got on the phone and talked to cousins, and they made fun of me because my Hebrew sounded American. And there was like this goofy, like, oh, I don't want to speak Hebrew because now I sound like an American. And my Hebrew really suffered because of that. And that's sort of like one of the big shifts that I remember from there was like that Hebrew language really suffering. Um, and I'm still working on it today. And it was actually I was in Israel earlier this year with my wife, and we were in a taxi, and I was talking to a Ukrainian Israeli who'd been in Israel for 20 years, and he was speaking Hebrew with a Ukrainian accent. And I said, it's so beautiful to hear like the true melting pot of Israel, hearing you speak like this. And then we spoke to an Ethiopian woman. And that same day, we spoke to a woman who was French, who was speaking Hebrew with a French accent. And I was like, why, why do I find it beautiful to hear Hebrew spoken with a Ukrainian accent and an Ethiopian accent and a French accent, but my American accent as a native Israeli is embarrassing, and that sort of shifted my thought process, and I've really leaned into the fact that I speak Hebrew not like an Israeli. I speak Hebrew like an American, even though I'm an Israeli, and that's
Well, and you've spent most of your life living in America or in Canada. And
correct.
so tell us a little bit about that upbringing and how your personal journey has kind of gone over those formative years of your education?
Yeah, so my dad was an Orthodox rabbi. My mom was the, sort of the Rebbitzin that people loved and expected. And I went to yeshiva most of my upbringing, not most of my, all of my schooling was in the yeshiva environment. So black hat. I can tell you the room that I was in and the conversation that we were having. I was in 10th grade when I sort of realized that I was an atheist, and I wasn't like struggling. I was like, I believe in the people, I believe in the community, I believe in the culture, I believe in the ethnicity, I believe in the nationality, all the other things that Judaism is, other than the dogma. And it was a really pivotal moment in my life when I figured that out. I was in 10th grade.
Do you remember
Um,
what the conversation was or what you were learning that gave you that
I
epiphany?
I can tell you the exact conversation. I don't know. I don't want to. I don't want to. I don't like to promote atheism. I don't like to put a fly in the ointment of especially if your students are going to be listening to this. But sure. So we were having a conversation. We were in Shir, and they were talking about the perfection of the Torah and how it's been around for 3,500 years, and it's perfect the way that it is. And somebody mentioned the differences between the Sephardi Sefer Torah and the Ashkenazi Sefer Torah, and it was comical. Like,
In appearance of the casing and things like that.
so that's where the conversation started, and then the rabbi mentioned, and there's also the difference in the texture of the cloth, the parchment,
Parchment. Mhm.
right? And then there's seven differences in the letters. So in the Torah, in the whole thousands and thousands of words, there's seven places in the Torah where a Sephardi Sefer Torah and an Ashkenazi Sefer Torah are different. And I was like, wait a second, hold on. You're telling me that they're not the same Sefer Torah? And he's like, well, it's essentially the same Sefer Torah. And I said, well, essentially the same Sefer Torah is not the same as the same. He goes, well, the seven places are like vavs or aleph or ayins. They don't change the meaning of the words. There's no argument that they change the meanings of the words. They're minor differences. And I said, listen, we learned about Ezra Sofer. We learned about the transition from Jerusalem to Babylon, and we learned about how the Torah was passed on from generation to generation. He goes, correct. And I said, and you're telling me that God told this to Moshe on Har Sinai, and this is the Torah that he gave them. And he goes, yes. I said, so then the Sephardim are wrong. He goes, no, that's an irrelevant. I said, okay, well, if you asked Baba Sali, would he tell you that his Sefer Torah is the Sefer Torah that Moshe got from Hashem on Har Sinai? He said, yes. I said, okay, so the Ashkenazim are wrong. And he's like, no. And I'm like, well, we can't both be right and have seven differences. Like the difference between a scroll and the hard shell doesn't bother me, but you can't tell me that they're both the word of God and there's only seven differences. And that's where I realized for the way that I see the world, and I don't my intent is not to try to convince other people of this, but the way that I see the world, Judaism is a community. It's a very important and rich culture. And we have this beautiful folklore that many people take literally. And so, when I was in Israel again in April, we went to Ir David with a wonderful tour guide named Arki. He's Israel with Arki if you're on Instagram. And he took us to Ir David and he said, Benji, how could you be an atheist while walking up the steps to the Beis Hamikdash in this newly excavated Ir David? And I said, I don't argue that the Beis Hamikdash was there, that there was a temple. The Jews were there. It's documented history. There's no question about that. I just don't believe that we gave sacrifices. There was a cloud of smoke that went up perfectly, and the wind didn't push the smoke right or left.
It's
That's
interesting that you
folklore.
say that because, even with our students here at the school, there have been times that I've had conversations with the students who have said, why do I need to do tefillah if I don't believe in God? And, it's not that they're denying being Jewish and being part of our school and being part of our community, but they don't believe in God. So why should they say all the prayers with God's name in it? So my response, and maybe this will work for you, maybe it won't. My response was take God out of the tefillah and concentrate on what the words of the tefillah are saying and what they mean to you. right? So, for example, like, if you're saying Modeh Ani, okay, you're thankful that you woke up this morning, right? If you're saying Matova, you're thankful that you're walking into a community of people that are praying together. If you're saying Rafeh Cholei Amo Yisrael, that you're praying that all of the Jewish people who are sick are. It doesn't have to be that God part. So I think that, as you're saying, right, you can have this belief and this connection to the temple standing and the history of the Jewish people as a people without necessarily believing in the God part. Although I do, obviously, as a Jewish educator and as a practicing, modern Orthodox Jew, that God part is a very important part for
Right.
me. But I think that there are a lot of ways to connect to community.
So I'll take that even a step further. And when people ask me about like how do you like somebody said to me, Benji, you're the most Jewish atheist
Yeah,
I've ever
you're the
met. And
fromest
I'm like,
atheist I've ever met.
you're not. I'm such a frum atheist that I've got friends and rabbis who say to me like, you're not an atheist, and I'm like, but I am. So I ask them this question: do you believe that Native American culture is something that is special and beautiful, and it should be celebrated? Right? We would never say no to that. Do you believe that ancient Chinese Buddhist culture is something beautiful and special, and it should be celebrated? Right? Do you believe the same thing for Indian culture, right? And Hinduism, right? So I don't believe in a purple seven-armed God with an elephant trunk, but I believe that the culture that believes that is beautiful and should be celebrated. And I believe that the Native American cultures, knowing that there's many different gods and many different versions of that, many different tribes, I don't believe that the world is a disc sitting on the back of a turtle flying through space, but Native Americans should embrace their culture, right? Like that's a beautiful culture. And so, in this story program, which I'm sure that we'll get to, I just did this show this past Saturday night, and we looked at the relation between so many of the different reggae songs and Tehillim, and where they were talking about, the rivers of Babylon and,
Mhm.
the returning to Zion and all these beautiful cultural references. Lean into that. Like, that's beautiful. And I don't have to believe in God to know that King David, among a cadre of other poets, wrote these amazing, amazing pieces of liturgy and songs and poems and things that 3,500 years later are still, or 3,000 years later are still being sung, not just by Jews, but by people all over the world.
So we'll come back to the
It's
music
amazing.
because I definitely want to talk about Story and
Yeah.
the music things that you're doing right now. I wonder, and this might be too personal of a question, and if it is, by all means, just tell me to be quiet. You've done that before. Um, I wonder if your mother's passing and your relationship with your father, who we called Uncle Yussel. I'm wondering how much of that factored into your belief in God today.
So it's a great question. You're not the first person to ask me that question. Most people assume that I'm angry at God and therefore, I reject. That's not the way that I see it. If you live in a world of science and statistics, bad things happen. People die of cancer when they're 50. That's unpleasant. That's a reality. I don't believe in a God that was like sitting on a throne reading the newspaper and saying, I should give Kathy Rosenzweig cancer and take her away from her family. Like I don't believe that. I believe that a really tragic thing happened to a really wonderful person, and that was very unpleasant. You know, and that is a callous thing to say, right? And I would not say that to somebody else going through a tragedy. I would not say that to somebody else living in our time with the awful things that our Jewish community has to deal with. I would not say that callously to somebody, you know, there are really horrible things that happen. And when you think about you know, the number of things that have to happen right to people to have a good and easy life, it's amazing that any of us are able to find joy. And that's really where the spiritual endeavor starts,
Right.
right? The ability to face difficult things and say, I can't change the past. I can't um, worry myself out of having a future. I can live today and have a good life today and focus on that stuff today. And by the way, there are some really amazing Jewish concepts that come into that being present. There's also some really wonderful Buddhist concepts that come into that being present. And there's really some, from many different religions, from many different cultures that have different versions of the prayer, the meditation, the community, the charitable acts, the giving, the being of service.
Yeah, we certainly don't own
There's
that. We lean
we
into
yeah,
it,
we
but we
don't
don't own it. Yeah.
correct. We don't have the market
Yeah.
on living a good life. And that's another one of those like for me, the idea of a God who says, if you happen to be born in this community to these parents in this time, you have access to this special relationship. And anybody who doesn't, you know, oh well,
No, but
sorry, you're
you've also taken a lot of those tragedies and taken a lot of those things that have happened in your life, and you've used them for the good, right? You brought up even just a second ago, right? It's how you live and the spirit and the joy that you're bringing into things. Uh, Tell us a little bit about you and Sarah and the girls.
sure.
Because
So
I think that that was a definite change in Benji when you brought Sarah to Passover Seder at Aunt Phyllis and Uncle Bill's house, and we sat down for Pesach Seder together, and we prepared the charoset beforehand, and we're sitting down and having Seder together, and that was the first time that we really had a chance to meet her. But like the sparkle in you at that point in time, that's when I saw a shift in who Benji Rosenzweig was. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that.
sure. So I think that was probably the first time that our family had seen me since I got sober. Um, I approximately 3 years sober at that point. 2.5, 3 years sober. I'm not exactly sure, but that would have been Passover 19 years ago. Sarah and I have been together for 20 years now. No, yeah, we've been together for 20 and we've been married for 18. So approximately that was Passover of 19 years ago. My wife is also in recovery, and we grew up in very different worlds. Sarah grew up in a reformed family who, you know, didn't participate much, but was, very culturally Jewish. Um, I'm just going to pause for a second and say, coming from the yeshiva background, uh, I had this impression that like Orthodox people were knowledgeable, conservative people were slightly less knowledgeable, and Reform people didn't know anything, right? That was sort of like the framework that the yeshiva system gave me. And my dad would point at your family and say, no, these are from conservative people. These are from Reform people. These are people who are actively involved in Jewish life and Jewish community. They just don't practice the same way that we practice. They drive to shul, but they go to shul every Shabbos. They go to a movie after Friday night dinner, but they have kiddush every Shabbos. And that was an epiphany. And so, call a kavod to your like that. You guys were really one of the first families that I ever saw in what my dad called being a from conservative family. And
You're the
that
frumest
was
atheist, and we were the frumest right. So,
so. I bring up Sarah's background because we approached recovery from two separate ways. So I was very hesitant to look at the spiritual side of recovery. I was looking at recovery as a way to get sober and for a way to not be miserable. And the higher power and steps and meetings and books really were a turnoff for me in the beginning because I didn't want to go back into another religion. And so I really was trying to keep that at arm's distance until I sort of surrendered and was like, I'm miserable and I'll do whatever I have to do to be less miserable and maybe find happy. Sarah did not have that aversion to the religion. Um, and so she was really looking for a place where she can sort of plug in a spiritual system into a cultural system. And so she was a few years in recovery. She had a good foundation of the program. And then when she found Jewish community, she was like, oh, this prayer overlaps with this prayer. I think that the last bracha, the Amida, the Elokai Netzor, like is very much in line when you say like find the prayers, like
Personal
that
meditation
is
there. Yeah.
those, the it's not a platitude of God of my fathers, you did this, you did that, now make this better. It's get me out of my way so that I can be of service to the people around me. Like that prayer for me very much is in line with the neutrality of recovery prayers. And so this journey of sort of finding where can I take a spiritual life and where can I take a recovery life and where can I take a Jewish community and some Jewish beliefs and put them together into a life that sort of makes sense. We operate in shades of gray, right? We operate in shades of gray. We do Kiddush and Hamotzi every Friday night. Um, but then we do stuff,
But you all,
we
but you
we don't.
also have your kids in Jewish day school. So
But and we have our kids in Jewish day school, and my daughter who's in Jewish day school had some friction with a rabbi last year who was teaching something, and she was like, well, that's nonsense. Like you don't actually believe that there was a 600-year-old man that spent 120 years building a boat that he put every animal into and then lived in there for a year and a half. And he was like, of course. And she was like, well, that's nonsense. And he goes, why do you say that? She's like, my dad told me that's nonsense. And I'm like,
way to
dude,
get
don't
her in
throw me
trouble
under
at
the
school.
bus. Like, yeah,
I
you
got
know.
to know Naama a little bit because her eighth grade trip to Israel was the same time that my son Dotan's eighth grade trip to Israel was, and I went on the trip with them, and so I got to spend some time with her because we stayed at the same hotels, and so we really got a good opportunity to get to know each other and to talk and for me to learn a little bit about her. One of the things that I love, and I asked her this question even while we were there, I asked her if she was still doing her daily mantras. Because one of the things that, obviously I follow you on social media, but one of the things for a long time you were posting when you were driving her to school every morning was she had these morning mantras. Tell us a little bit about those and why those are so important.
Yeah. So, um, on her first day of first grade, she was going to a new school, Hillel Day School here in Detroit, and she was nervous. And she was like, I'm going to a new school. I don't know any of the kids. I don't know. And I had seen a video on social media of a dad standing in front of a mirror with his daughter, and he was like, "You say I am strong, I'm smart, I'm powerful, I respect people, and I expect to be respected." And like this little girl who was like 4 was like into it, and I was like, I guess I'll just steal that, like let's copy that, what is it? Imitation is the best form of flattery. Like I'm just gonna do what that guy did and be inspired by him. And so I did, and I had these like 4 or 5 mantras that I did with her, and she got like fired up, and we
But they
got in,
weren't short.
we
They
got
weren't
out.
like a sentence here and a sentence there. Some of them were long.
Well, so in the first couple of days, it was just that, and then I was like, "Hey, Nama, do you want to add anything to it?" And we ended up creating like it was like 15 mantras that we did every morning, and I at like day like 5 or 7, I recorded it to send to Sarah because Sarah was like, "What are you talking about?" And so I recorded it with her, and then I just popped it on an Instagram story, and people went nuts and were like, "Oh my God, I want more of that." And so every once in a while, I'd post it as a post, but for 8 years, I posted every single school day. I posted a story of us doing these morning mantras, and they evolved. Like the first 5, that I'm strong, I'm smart, I'm beautiful, I respect people, I expect to be respected, I treat people kindly, I treat people fairly, my aunts and uncles and bubbies and zadies love me. You know, those were constant, but they evolved as she grew older, and she changed and she adapted. And when she got to high school, she was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm in high
Mhm.
school. I'm a big kid. I'm not doing this anymore. And that's also when my social media sort of went from friends and family to bigger stuff. Um, I was doing a lot of public speaking. I was doing some consulting, and by like seventh grade, people would come up to Nama like randomly in the school and say, "Hey, tell me give me the mantras. Let me hear them live." And she's like, "Who are you? Why are you talking to me?" And she was right. Like
Yeah.
it was, arguably inappropriate for an adult to expect her to be a performing monkey, but that's so she didn't appreciate that experience at all. And so she was like, "Hey, I don't want people recognizing me from your social media. I don't want to do this." And I said, "Well, I'll tell you what, why don't we do it and just not post it?" And she was like, "That's a fair compromise." So in ninth grade, we did that. We did it every day, and we didn't post it. And then in 10th grade, we there's an Israeli family who lives around the block from us, and their daughter is in Nama's class, and they asked us to drive her to school with us. And so
Didn't want to do it in
once
the
we
car
were
with somebody
picking,
else.
so
Yeah.
she's like, "I don't want to do this in the car with somebody else." And so it stopped in 10th grade, which was a bummer. Um, but I'm not going to force it. I can tell you that just like I was able to rattle off a bunch of them, if you ask her to be a performing monkey and she actually likes you, she can still rattle them off. And there have been a handful of times where she was feeling down and I jumped into it, and it's like muscle memory, and we can get through them pretty well. And I actually had somebody who follows us on social media that made a poster of the mantras and sent us a
Awesome.
poster that we have. And so it's here.
You mentioned the public speaking, and let me preface this by saying that the family talks about you behind your back because that's what family does. But when we talk about you, one of the things that we always say to each other is how impressed we are with you as a parent. That who you are and what you do for your daughters is incredible. You mentioned the public speaking, and you did a TED talk in Detroit, and it was specific to Ella. And I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about Ella, and about that talk and about the work that you're doing on her behalf and behalf of other kids like her.
Yeah. Um, so let me back up for a moment and say that I have my daughter Ella's 14 years old. She was born with something called agenesis of the corpus callosum. Agenesis means it was not uh, developed, right? It wasn't created, like the word Genesis from the Torah. So agenesis means it
Without the
wasn't
God part,
created
obviously, but yeah.
without the God. Yeah, God was like he was auditing Ella's brain and was like, "Oops, I forgot that part." Corpus callosum is the main bridge that connects the right and the left side of the brain. So we have multiple bridges: right, left, front, back, top, bottom. There's 12 bridges in the brain. Ella only has 11. The corpus callosum is the main one. So she has all the neurons and fibers that are supposed to be there. So imagine you had to drive from Detroit to Cleveland, and I-75 was under construction. You could still get to Cleveland, you just have to go a different route. And that analogy is true for any location. So we found out about this when Sarah was 20 weeks pregnant. So we knew in utero, and the doctor said to us, "Don't Google agenesis of the corpus callosum, because if you do, you'll just get really bad stuff." And of course, we went home and Googled it, and he was right. And it was just really bad stuff. And it sort of scared me straight. And we didn't look online, and we were like, we knew that it was a rare condition, but
Oh,
we
rare.
didn't know anything basically. When Ella was 4, my sister Miriam was talking to somebody who, through a long conversation, ACC came up, and the guy said, "Oh, are they in the Facebook group?" And she was like, "What Facebook group?" And that started us finding community. We joined this Facebook group and found out that there was a conference in Boston 2 weeks later, and we literally jumped on a plane and flew to Boston to go to this conference. And then we found out that one of our close friends' best friend has a son with ACC, and we didn't know that. Like it was just the snowball effect. And I was really frustrated. I'm like, it's kind of BS that we had to live in this dark hole for 4 years, thinking that we were alone in the world and had no information. And so I sort of went on a mission to fill the front page of Google with good information about ACC. And so I asked the Friendship Circle, who at the time, 10 years ago, back then, blogs were a thing. And so I asked them if I could contribute to their blog solely for the purpose of using the words ACC or agenesis of the corpus callosum so that when somebody Googled it, they would find good information. And we were very successful in doing that. And I spent a couple of years doing that. And then she got another diagnosis called Coffin-Cyrus syndrome. And Coffin-Cyrus syndrome is a genetic mutation. Now, agenesis of the corpus callosum has about 6 or 7 thousand people in the world who have it. So that's a pretty rare condition. Um, CSS, Coffin-Cyrus syndrome, has about 600 people in the world who have it.
Wow.
That's a super rare disease. Um, CSS causes structural defects in the body. So that is what caused the ACC. We got that diagnosis when she was like 7 or 8. And so I went on that same, like, hey, we need to fill the front page of Google with good information. Thank goodness, 10 years later, there's lots of people doing that. And that's no longer what I need to be doing because the first page of Google is full with good information. We started a foundation, Facebook groups, pages, websites, and so there's access to information today. And if you Google either one of those conditions, you can find. But I still get emails from people who find the Friendship Circle blog, and that was the first thing that they found, and and they reach out, and that's pretty amazing. That kick-started the conversation of talking about special needs parenting and community during COVID. In the early days of COVID, when I had literally, nothing better to do, I posted a video of myself playing guitar and Ella sort of singing along. Ella's nonverbal. She uses sounds and sign language, but she doesn't use words. Her receptive language is 100%. So she understands everything that you're telling her. Um, and a bunch of people were like, that was awesome. That was so much fun.
Yeah,
And I was
watching
like,
her
oh, if it's
perform with you playing in the background was pretty cool.
it was a lot of fun. I mean, she loves Lizzo and she loves, Aretha Franklin and she loves Whitney Houston, but she also loves it when I do a Metallica song or I do a Green Day song. And so we did these like almost puppet shows of us just playing these songs, and people really enjoyed it. And it was a really fun way for me to spend an hour and a half every day. As I didn't know how to use editing software, I didn't know how to make videos or anything like that. This was really the genesis of that. Forgive the pun. Was me recording these videos, posting every day. Uh, these videos of us playing music together.
But she became a star
And
because of it also, right? Her
she, be-
her
yeah,
singing along. I mean, I'm sure she's recognized all over because of those videos and the passion that she had in belting those songs out.
absolutely. I'm still
It
waiting for
certainly wasn't
Lizzo
for
to.
your guitar playing.
That is for damn sure. So I'm still waiting to get a phone call from Lizzo to be like, "Hey, I saw the video of Ella. Does she want to come on stage with me?" And the answer will be 100% yes. Like,
Yeah.
um, so from that, TEDx reached out to me and said, "We'd like you to give a TED talk and talk about how you guys used music to create and enhance this language for her." Because I talked about it in the videos, like. Very often I'd be like, this is what she's saying, this is how she's saying, or this is how she learned this word. Because it's not ASL, we call it a sophisticated game of charades. So um, I gave that talk. It was amazing. It was an absolutely incredible experience. Uh, she was she was amazing on stage. She was making jokes again, nonverbal. She was making jokes using sign language, and people understood them. She got a room of 2,500 people to laugh.
It was
It
awesome.
was unbelievable.
The video's great. Everybody should see
Yeah,
it. It's great. It's
it
great.
it was amazing. I got off stage and a guy came over to me and said, "Hey, I'm the COO of XYZ company, and my biggest problem is that the marketing people think that they're the most important people in the company. The C-level executives think that they're the most important people in the company, and the salespeople think that they're the most important people in the company, and they don't talk to each other well. Everything that you talked about in this, how to communicate with other people, especially people who don't communicate the same way as you, could you come into my office and spend a couple hours with my teams and
Um,
just talk about that stuff? And I was like, yeah. He goes, how much do you charge? I'm like, I don't know. But what do you normally pay for something like that? And he threw out a number, and I was like, done. And then I just said to people, hey, if you want me to come in and talk to your company about this stuff. And that's how I started talking to organizations about nonverbal communication. And I've gone into offices and talked to sales teams and C-level executives. Um, it's not rocket science. It's really just about communication and how we talk to one another. And so prior to October 7th, my social media presence was really about special needs advocacy, nonverbal communication, music and recovery, and real estate. Because for my day job, I'm a commercial real estate broker, and I buy and sell and lease properties in the Metro Detroit area. Um, and
and
then
then
October
October
7th
7th.
happened,
Mhm.
and everything changed. So you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to talk a little bit about that just for a couple of minutes on how your advocacy in a place where I'm sure there's rampant anti-Semitism, and how that public image that you have in talking about the events of October 7th and the rise of anti-Semitism in our country, how has that impacted you personally and your life living in Detroit?
So I'm going to answer the last part of your question first. The rampant anti-Semitism and the negative comments and that part of things, I see as a silver lining for me, not for the Jewish community, for me, because all of that reinforces my resolve and understanding that Zionism is as important today as it ever was, and that our job is to be proud Zionists and proud Jews. And if you look through the comments on any Jewish creators uh, account,
Hmm.
and it was like, "Hey, Jews are cool, but we got to get through this together and figure it out." Then you could argue maybe Zionism isn't necessary. But Hitler was right comments, you're kind of proving our point here, you know. So that's the second half. The what happened immediately after October 7th, and I'll be honest, on October 7th, I didn't understand the gravity. It was Chag. We were doing family stuff with the kids because there was stuff going on for Simchat Torah. I saw something on my phone. I was like, oh, this is awful. There's another attack in Israel. And it wasn't until at night after the kids went down to sleep that I looked at my phone and I was like, oh my God, what? This is significantly worse than what I saw in 7 seconds, earlier in the day. And as I was scrolling and reading, I saw my friends turn their profile pictures into paragliders with Palestinian flags.
Mm.
And I was like, what are you doing? What are you talking about? And they said, well, Zionism is bad and colonialism and apartheid. And I go, whoa, whoa, whoa. We haven't even finished getting Hamas out of Israel yet. What are you talking about? Like, what, they're like, there's going to be a ground invasion and it's going to be a genocide and there's going to be starvation. And I was like, you're talking about what's going to be. What are you talking about? Like right now? And somebody said to me, don't worry, Benji, you're one of the good ones. We're not mad at you. And that like rearranged my whole thought process. And I said, by the standards that you're setting, I need you to understand I'm not one of the good ones. That's not like I am a Zionist, and I posted a video because my friends are mostly liberal in recovery, music, special needs. Like that's the community that I have. So I posted a number of videos just saying this is what's going on and what you're hearing is insane. And people were calling me up and saying, or sending me messages and saying, Benji, you're saying that you're a Zionist, but Zionists are racist, and you're not a racist, right? You're saying that you're a Zionist, but Zionists are bad people. You're not. And I said, I'm not just going to respond to you. I'm going to post a video responding to your questions so that everybody can see it. And every time I posted a video, it spurred three more questions. And every so I'd answer those questions. And so that took on a life of its own. And I came to the realization that like those things that my grandfather told me about America being the most wonderful place for Jews in the last 2,000 years, but it could change at the drop of a hat. And I would say to him, you're crazy. It's the 90s. Nothing like that could ever happen again. And it all changed at the drop of a hat. And um, my viewpoint is I'm not going to change the minds of people who are out to harm us. I'm looking to have conversations with people who are either A, reasonable people who are getting bad information, and so it's my job to give them good
Yeah.
information, and B, the students in your school, and almost as important, the parents of the students in your school who are saying, my kid's coming home from the high school and he asked me this question. I don't know how to answer him. My daughter just came home from college and she said that her professor said X, Y, and Z. I don't know how to answer that. That's the video that I want to make, how to answer the question. And so people often ask me, why are you responding to comments? And I said, the reason I'm responding to comments is so that other people who are reading know how to respond to
Yeah.
somebody saying to that. Um, so that's where my shift went. And so today I really have this. This is not on purpose, but I'm wearing this shirt that says empower Jews," right? That's sort of the thought process that I've moved to, is that empower Jews. You, Danny Weiss, Rabbi Weiss, forgive me, right, are an empowered Jew. Your job is to empower other Jews. And whatever way or methods that you use that, that's that's what you need to be doing. And so, yeah,
So one of
that,
the other big Israel advocates that's out there right now and has had some great things, and his music has really touched a lot of people over the last couple of years, is Mattis Yahu. And I know that this past Saturday night, you had an event, Storied, that featured Mattis Yahu, and it's not the first time that you've done something about Judaism and music and the relationship between the two. And I will say that you turned me on to a lot of musicians. I remember you had given me a DVD that had like a ton of different albums. That's how I learned about Ray LaMontagne and Brett Dennen and Glenn Hansard and like all of these, not just secular music, but Yosef Karduner, like people that I had never really heard about that are now part of my musical library that I listen to all the time, that have made a difference for me. Let's talk a little bit about the storied program that you're doing, and your goal in using music as a way to tell a Jewish story.
yeah. So, um, in another example of realizing that my father and grandfather were right about a lot of things that I didn't want to admit that they were right about. Um, my dad, as an Orthodox rabbi, used to say that the two most challenging things for Jewish continuity are, number one, Holocaust education being a primary focus of Jewish identity, and number two, the Yiddish expression "Schwer zu sein a Yid," which means it's hard to be Jewish. Because if the messaging that we give kids is it's hard to be Jewish and then they're going to try to kill you, why would kids try to be Jewish? Why would kids participate? It's so much easier to just take the Magen David off, go to your college, change your name from David to, Jerry, and nobody is the wiser. Um, Shortly after October 7th, we went to a bar mitzvah, and I was like, oh, I'm so glad that we're going to go and just spend a couple of minutes, smiling and celebrating this kid. And the whole bar mitzvah was focused around October 7th and hostages and soldiers that had fallen. And uh, it was hard. I was like, this is hard. Now it's appropriately hard, right? The family didn't do anything wrong. It was a month after October 7th, right? Like they were doing the right thing. Jewish events are appropriately difficult today. right? We are grappling with a lot of difficult things. But if the only messaging that our kids are getting is it's hard to be Jewish and then they're coming for you, they're not sticking around because they why would they?
Mhm.
So storied is not the answer to that problem, but it's an answer to that problem. So the first storied event that we did was about the Beatles, and we looked at the we looked at the contribution and collaboration that Jews and the Jewish community had on the Beatles to really create the Beatles. So people said, "Oh, you're going to tell the Brian Epstein story." And I said, "Yeah, I am." But Brian Epstein was one of 14 stories that we told in that first show. And people are like, "There's 14 stories of Jews who contributed to the Beatles?" And yeah, there are. And by the way, there's even more. I just had to keep it to a reasonable amount of time. And so the format is kind of like VH1 Storytellers meets MTV Unplugged, but through a Jewish lens and in a live setting. So I tell a story, the band plays a song. I tell a story, the band plays a song. I tell a story, the band plays a song, and so on. That was wildly successful. People loved it. They immediately were like, "Do another show." And so I wrote a script about grunge. Again, Jews in the Jewish community collaborating and contributing to bands. We did a full two set show, 22 stories with 22 songs.
Wow.
The first half was Jews who were contributing to the bands, and the second half were Jews who were in the bands. Was the second set. People loved it. Um, the third show that we did was about the Grateful Dead, with the first set being it was 18 stories, 18 songs. The first set was Jews who were in the band and the band's organization, so the immediate nucleus of the Grateful Dead. The second set was about the circus of people around the Grateful Dead and the community around. But somebody said to me, another argument that I used to have with my dad was the difference between Jewish content and Jewish adjacent content,
Hmm.
right? So my dad used to argue that when the Jewish news says this lawyer went from this firm to that firm, that's not Jewish news, that's news
That's news
about
about a Jew.
Jews.
Yeah.
Right. So somebody said to me, "Benji, storied isn't Jewish content, it's content about Jews." And so I thought of, I really said, okay, well, let's dig into it. And so in the Grateful Dead writing the script, I dug into the biblical stories and the biblical references and Jewish content within the Grateful Dead.
Hmm.
And I'll just give you one example. When you look at the origin of the name Grateful Dead, there's the story of like Phil Lesh opening up an encyclopedia and just putting his finger on anywhere on the page, and he sees the term Grateful Dead, which means a dead person's soul showing gratitude for the way that the people honored him in the burial, or took care of them in burying him properly. And I was like, that's Chesed Shalemus. That's the definition of Chesed Shalemus. Like the Grateful Dead's name in concept is a Jewish idea, and so we really leaned into a lot of those
Nice.
biblical references and biblical stories. Um, so we just did a show this past Saturday night. It's the fourth show. It's called the Reggae Sessions. We deemed it these Psalms of Freedom, and we looked at the theology and history of reggae and the Jewish roots in Rastafarianism, and talked about those Jewish themes and Jewish ideas and those Jewish concepts that are steeped in reggae and Rastafarianism. And then all the Jewish references, how many songs are referencing
About Zion.
from
Mhm.
what's that?
About Zion.
About Zion, about Israel,
Or
about
about Jah.
Friday.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. So we did 14 stories and 14 songs. We got Mattisyahu to come in and perform with us. People thought it was going to be a Marley cover show. We did three Bob Marley songs and a couple of Mattisyahu songs, and the rest of it was, the gamut of reggae music. And I sent out an email about 3 weeks, maybe a month before the show, to donors, people who we're a 501(c)(3). We started a nonprofit. So just donors and supporters, and said, We have a theater. It's got 600 seats. We're pushing. If you're interested, buy a ticket. And I'm really focused on bringing young people to this event. And a donor said, "How serious are you about bringing young people?" And I said, "Very." And he said, "Write me down for 100 tickets, call the Jewish schools, and tell them that any Jewish student that wants to come,
Wow.
it's on me." And so we ended up with 65 high school, well, from I think from grade 6 through 12, 65 students, and then another 20 or 25 from university and a couple of other students. We ended up reaching out to some high schools in BBYO. And so we had about 95 students in the crowd, aside from all the, adults in the room. But we sold out a 600 person theater, 600 seat venue, and it was pretty amazing.
So time for a Judaism in the Blues and to come down to Memphis and do something here.
So blues is I have a folder in my Dropbox on the blues as I'm doing research and I find references. We announced on Saturday night that the next show that we're doing is about Jewish women's contribution to music,
Mm,
and so it's going to be an all-female band and an all-female show.
nice.
Just talking about everybody from Carole King to Pink and Amy Winehouse and everybody in between. And so we're gonna do some fun stuff for the adults and the kids. I really want to focus
And
on
do you record
those.
these? Is there a way to be able to watch previous shows?
So we record them. If you go to our YouTube, there's some clips from the various shows. We've released a handful of those, but really what we found was that people kept coming to me and asking me to expand on some of the stories. And so I realized that the 3 to 5 minute stories weren't enough information for
Yeah.
for somebody who really wants to dig in. And so we started a podcast, and each episode starts with a recording of the one story. And we spent an hour talking about that story. So today, actually this morning at 8 o'clock, we released episode 8 of 14 of season one, which is the Beatles. Andy Buckley, who's David Green from The Office.
Hmm.
So Andy Buckley is today's guest
Very
on
cool.
the podcast, and we talked about. So today's episode is looking at the cover of the Sergeant Pepper Lonely Hearts Club Band album, and the Jews who are on that album cover, and talking about who those Jews were and why they were so meaningful to the Beatles that they would get this spot on this iconic album. And then there were three non-Jews who got honorary mention as people who contributed to the Jewish community, including Aldous Huxley, who I'm sure you remember from your high school and college days. But Aldous Huxley was a playwright who used his money during the late 30s and early 40s. All the money that he made in the late 30s and early 40s, he used to buy visas for Jews to get out of
Mhm.
Europe, and spent hundreds of thousands of dollars buying visa and saving thousands of Jewish lives. And so Aldous Huxley got an honorable mention on that in this show.
So I think, and to wrap up our time, first of all, thank you for spending so much time talking to all of us. I think this is incredible work that you're doing. You just ended by talking about saving Jews, and I think that the work that you're doing, the voice that you have, the putting yourself out there the way that you are, that is contributing to the saving of Jews. That connection, that deep connection, that love of the culture, the religion, maybe not the godliness side of it, but all of those things I think is tremendous and so important, and it's an important part of Jewish education. You're right, and here I am sitting here as a Jewish educator, and I'm always thinking about how do I tell the stories, because that's the hook, right? That's what's going to get people in. And whether it's the story of the early part of your life of moving to America, whether it's the story of your sobriety and meeting Sarah, whether it's the story of Ella and working to make sure that people understand what she's going through and what it's like to be a parent of a child who's going through that, or the mantras with Na'amah, or this work that you're doing for Israel advocacy and telling the Jewish story through music. That is Jewish education, and that's what's going to inspire the next generation to be doing things. And I think it's really tremendous stuff that you're doing. I'm just going to point to one more thing. The guitar is behind you on the wall. Jessica keeps getting upset at me that I keep wanting to buy more musical instruments because I don't play any of them. But I just want to have stringed instruments hanging from my wall. But I don't see an oud behind you. You got to get an oud.
So the problem is that I don't know how to play an oud. And
I don't know how to play a guitar. I still have a guitar. I have a
well,
mandolin. I don't play the mandolin.
I have a broken, not usable ode in my
You gotta. It
office.
just looks good behind you. You just got to hang it up on the
Well,
wall.
I was going to say I'll trade you that for a functional guitar.
Benji, I really appreciate spending some time really getting to know you on a deeper level. Uh, you inspire me all the time. I talk about it all the time with Jessica, with my dad, with Johnny. Um, Everything that you do and what you mean to our family and to the Jewish world is really tremendous. And uh, I know that your mom would be very proud of you. And I
Thank
know
you.
that you also would be very proud, especially of the music stuff that you're doing now. And you're a mensch. You're a good person. And thank you for spending this time with me.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you, and I meant what I said. You know, your family taught me a lot about the ability to be engaged in Jewish community without having to do it the way somebody who wears a black hat tells you that you have to do it, and that was impactful on my life.
Just remember my black hat has a big block O on it for Ohio State, and then we're good.
Do you, I mean, before we go, I just want to tell you one thing. My grandfather, who was not your grandfather, was your whatever. Uh, so Grandpa Hartstein, when we moved to America, Grandpa Hartstein said to me, "If you want to be a part of this family, you're going to love the Buckeyes, the Browns, and the Indians as much as we do."
And there you
And I
are
was
living in
like,
Detroit, ruining it for all of us.
I said to him, I don't know what Buckeyes or Browns or Indians are, but they're great. And I remember like that Sunday there was massive shouting coming from the living room, and I thought there was a fight, and I was like, I'm out of here. And Phyllis was like, no, 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 it's fine. They're watching football. And I was like, what are you? And she like brought me into the room, and you and your brother and your dad and John and Steve and Uncle Willie and like there was like eight of you in there, and you were like screaming at the TV. And I was like, what is happening? And she's like, this is football. And I was like, I think that's what turned me off of sports. I was like, I'll focus on the music. So
uh, Great story. All right, Benji, I
yeah,
appreciate it. Thank you for your time. Give Sarah and the kids
thank
a
you.
hug for me. Tell them we missed them.
Absolutely. Love you.
All
Thank
right,
you.
take care, buddy. Bye.